I'll show you what I mean. What we want to do is we want to have a way to make promises credible. What a credible promise is it is a promise that you make about what you're going to do in a game that people have a reason to believe you will follow through on. Right? You're saying this is what I'm going to do, and I need to be able to believe you that it is in your interest to stick to your word. Right? In this case, it is not in B's interest to stick to their word. Right? B says, hey, if you go up, I'm going to go up 2. That's my promise to you. But once we get here, it's now in B's interest to break their promise. That is a non-credible promise. A has no reason to believe that B will actually do what they say they're going to do. So why would they? Why would A believe? Why would A go out on that limb and just sort of trust that B is going to, do something that's worse for themselves? So we have to change the game in some way. So promises or threats are credible when it's in your interest to actually follow through on the thing you say you're going to do. And they are non-credible when it is in your interest to go back on your word. So how do we get this to work? Right? How do we not live in a world where there's no such thing as cooperation? Well, 2 big ways in which cooperation can arise, even in these situations where we might expect that it's not in somebody's interest to cooperate. One is appearing or being irrational. And the other one, this is a big one, is repeated interactions. So let's talk about the first one. It's a little bit, it definitely shows up in the rule. The second one's really going to be the big important one. We're going to talk about this one too. So why can't we just commit to up? The real problem here is that B is too good at playing the game. Right? The fact that they are good at playing the game means that they will recognize, hey, I just agreed to go up, but we're here and there's nothing sticking me to that promise. I can break it. Right? I'm going to pursue the maximum points possible. And because I'm a good game player, that's what I'm going to do. Right? If they were a worse game player, somehow they would get a better outcome from the game because they would actually be able to make promises and then follow through on them. So it's a weird situation where being a worse decision maker can actually sometimes lead you to get better outcomes because people are going to be able to rely on you, at least to some degree, to follow through on what you say, even if it's not in your interest. But you don't actually have to even be a bad decision maker. You could just appear to be one. Will also work. If you can convince the other person you're playing with that you are irrational, that you are not making choices in a way that makes you as good at the game as possible, this can make your threats and promises credible. Why? Because irrational people can keep threats and promises even when it is a bad idea to do so. Let me give you an example. So when I was in 9th grade health class, came in on the first day, and the teacher showed up, and she did not appear to be a stable person. She was angry, she was yelling a lot, she threw kids out of class and made them go to the principal's office for basically nothing. It was not a nice class to be in. And then over the next couple of weeks in the class, she sort of cooled off, became a much more regular kind of class. And so I saw her a while later after the class, and what she told me is that she intentionally acts wild on the first day of class so that students don't think that she's irrational, that they don't want to act up in her class because they think she's going to overreact far beyond what would make sense. The idea being that it would keep kids in line a little bit, right? That if they thought, well, what is the teacher's rational response to me acting up in class? Well, sending somebody to the principal's office is work. You got to fill out forms. It's kind of annoying. You have to really be strict in your classroom, and that's hard. And so really, most of the time, it's not really going to be in the teacher's interest to really send the kid to the principal's office or be that harsh and on discipline, right? It's not rational. But if you can convince somebody that you're irrational, then they would anticipate that you would crack down, even when it's not really in their interest to do so. And so you're not going to try to misbehave in the first place. That's the logic that she was following, right? She was trying to appear irrational so as to get other people to believe that she would do an irrational thing, and they basically don't test me, right? Don't test me because I'm not going to act in a rational way. So I keep having the opportunity to update the slide, and I keep deciding not to because I just like how evergreen it is. Government shutdown and the debt ceiling. In 2013, And also, a couple months ago, we were about to hit the debt ceiling. Right? So the debt ceiling is a law that says that the government is not allowed to basically borrow beyond a certain amount of money. And what this means is that, well, then which is a problem because a lot of the commitments that the federal government has committed to require them to borrow money. If they don't have enough money in the budget, taxes are not enough to cover everything that they've committed to spend to, then including interest payments on old debts, then they just can't pay for it. They basically have to default on their payments, which would be extremely bad. It would be very, very, very bad if that happened. So a lot of the world financial system runs on the fact that the dollar is stable and the US government pays its debts. If that ever stops happening, the entire financial system is going to have to change extremely rapidly and very chaotically. It would be one of the most disruptive events in our lives, and that's saying a lot. And so it would be really, 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 really bad if the government got to the point where it decided to default on its debts. It would be the worst decision the federal government has made in a very long time, unambiguously. So, brings you to an interesting point. So we have the debt ceiling, which basically says the government's going to have to default on its debts unless you can agree to either raise the debt ceiling or get the money in some other way. Both of those things are very hard. Or just push the deadline back, which is what they often do. Which, and both sides, but everybody in Congress realizes how bad of a thing it would be if this were to default. Now that's a problem because if the other side knows that you know how bad it is and that you want to raise the debt ceiling, they're not going to give you anything for it, right? Because think about what's going on. So you, in the negotiation over raising the debt ceiling, what you really want is to raise the debt ceiling, but then also to have your opponents give you some sort of concession in exchange for it. But why would they do that if they think you're going to act rationally, right? If they think you're going to act rationally, then when the debt ceiling goes up for a vote, every single person is going to vote in favor of it because it would be absolute madness not to, right? So if you want them to give you something in exchange for your vote, you have to get them to believe that you're going to vote no when it comes down to it, even with the terrible consequences that it will have, right? So one way you can do this is to appear irrational. In this particular instance, it was the Republicans' turn to appear irrational because they were not in charge of Congress. They were sort of the secondary party at the time. And so that's what they did. They basically went around saying, hey, we're going to vote no on the debt ceiling. We're going to vote to basically make the government default on its debts unless you give us what we want. Now, from the Democrat side, that would be, why would you give them what they want? It's in their interest to vote for the debt ceiling anyway, even with nothing else attached to it. So it's the Republicans' job to convince them that no, actually, we will do the thing. We will push the button that blows everything up unless you give us what we want. And so you can ask the question, were they actually being irrational like this? Did they not really realize the consequences of what they were doing? Or are they just trying to get concessions out of the Democrats? And it's impossible to really tell the difference. If it was possible to tell the difference, then why would the Democrats give them anything? Right? So they got to be convincing. And in the end, it worked out, right? The Republicans did end up voting for the debt ceiling to be raised, the rational thing to do, along with the Democrats, but only after the Democrats have given them some of what they wanted, right? So the approach of claiming that you would vote against this worked, right? It got them the concessions, or some of the concessions, what they wanted.